Have you ever missed something important because you were too busy looking at the clock? At 5:40 on a gray Tuesday morning, while most of Chicago was still rubbing sleep from its eyes, Elijah Turner sat alone on a train platform bench with a paper cup of black coffee warming his hands. The air carried the sharp bite of early spring. Not freezing, just cold enough to make people walk faster and look down. Elijah checked the time on the cracked face of his old watch. 20 minutes until the train arrived. 20 minutes before another workday began. He took a slow sip of coffee and glanced at the photo taped inside his lunchbox. His daughter, Maya, 8 years old, smiling with 2 missing front teeth and a backpack nearly bigger than she was. The picture always made him smile. Some men carried Lucky Charms. Elijah carried reminders. Then he heard it. Not a scream, not a cry for help, just a small voice trembling beneath the noise of the city. Excuse me, excuse me. He turned. About 30 feet away stood an elderly woman wrapped in a cream-colored coat. Her silver hair was slightly messy, her hands shaking as she looked around the station. People brushed past her without slowing down. Some never even looked her way. The woman took a few uncertain steps, then stopped again. Her confusion seemed to grow with every passing second. Elijah watched for a moment. Maybe someone would help. Nobody did. A businessman hurried past while talking on his phone. A young couple walked around her. A delivery driver glanced over and kept moving. The city had places to be. The city always had places to be. Elijah stood up. His train wasn't due for another 18 minutes. He could spare a minute. At least that was what he told himself. As he approached, the woman looked relieved and embarrassed at the same time. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Elijah asked gently. The woman blinked several times before answering. I think I'm lost." Her voice was soft. Fragile. "I had my phone. Then I couldn't find it. And now—" She stopped speaking. Her eyes drifted toward the street, as if hoping the answer might be waiting there. Elijah noticed something else. Fear. Not panic. Not drama. Just quiet fear. The kind people tried to hide. "Do you know your address?" he asked. She hesitated. Usually. That single word told him everything he needed to know. Elijah looked down the tracks. His train would arrive soon. He looked back at the woman. Then he sat beside her. "Let's figure it out together." The woman smiled weakly. 10 minutes became 20. 20 became 35. Elijah bought her another cup of coffee from a nearby kiosk. He called local transit security. He spoke calmly when she forgot details. He listened when she remembered pieces of them. Little by little, the puzzle came together. A name, an address, a family contact. Eventually, a patrol officer arrived and confirmed where she lived. Relief softened the woman's face. "You stayed," she whispered. Elijah shrugged. "You look like you needed someone to stay." The officer offered to take her home. Before leaving, the woman touched Elijah's arm. Most people didn't stop. Elijah smiled. A quiet smile. The kind that never asked for credit. Sometimes people are just in a hurry. Then he looked at his watch. The train was long gone. So was any chance of arriving at work on time. By the time Elijah reached Whitmore Capitol, the morning rush had already swallowed downtown Chicago. Glass towers reflected a sky the color of steel. Car horns echoed between buildings. People hurried through revolving doors carrying coffee cups and unfinished conversations. Elijah moved faster than usual. His tool bag bounced lightly against his shoulder. The old watch on his wrist showed 8:27. 27 minutes late. He already knew how this would look. The security guard near the entrance glanced at the clock mounted above the lobby desk, and then at Elijah. "Rough morning?" he asked. Elijah managed a small smile. "Something like that." The guard nodded but did not press further. Everyone had their own battles. The elevator ride to the maintenance department felt longer than normal. Inside the mirrored walls, Elijah caught a glimpse of himself. Work jacket, worn boots, coffee stain near one sleeve. A man trying his best. Nothing more. When the elevator doors opened, he immediately noticed the tension. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. A few coworkers exchanged looks. Something was wrong. Very wrong. "Elijah," one technician whispered. "She is here." He did not need to ask who. Charlotte Whitmore, Chief Executive Officer, owner of the building. The woman whose name appeared on every company report and every financial headline in the city. Elijah exhaled slowly. Then he walked forward. Charlotte stood near the center of the department floor, surrounded by managers. Her white blouse was flawless. Her expression was not. She looked exhausted, the kind of exhausted that expensive clothes could not hide. A tablet rested in one hand, while her phone vibrated repeatedly in the other. Another crisis. Another problem demanding her attention. The moment she saw Elijah, her eyes sharpened. Mr. Turner. Her voice carried across the room. Professional. Cold. Everyone became very interested in their computer screens. Elijah stopped a few feet away. Good morning, ma'am. Charlotte glanced at her watch. Do you know what time your shift starts? Yes, ma'am. And yet you arrived 27 minutes late. Elijah opened his mouth slightly. Not to argue, simply to explain. But Charlotte continued before a single word could leave his lips. This company operates on accountability. Her voice remained calm. Somehow that made it worse. If every employee decided that schedules were optional, nothing would function. The room felt smaller, quieter. Elijah lowered his eyes briefly. He could have explained everything. The train station, the lost woman, the hour spent helping a stranger get home safely. Instead, he said, I understand. Charlotte studied him for a second. Maybe she expected excuses. Maybe she expected resistance. What she found was neither. Just a tired man standing calmly in front of her. Human resources will process your termination effective immediately, she said. The words landed with surprising softness. Soft words could still change a life. A silence settled over the department. Heavy, uncomfortable. One manager shifted awkwardly. Another looked away. Elijah simply nodded. All right. Charlotte blinked once. Almost surprised. That is all. Elijah adjusted the strap on his tool bag. Yes, ma'am. For a brief moment, something flickered across her face. Confusion, perhaps. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Her phone buzzed again. Another emergency. Another meeting. Another demand. Elijah turned toward his locker. Behind him, Charlotte was already walking away. Neither of them knew that the most important part of this morning had happened long before either one entered the building. Elijah emptied his locker in less than 10 minutes. There was not much to take. A spare work shirt, a flashlight with scratched plastic, a small box of tools he had purchased himself over the years. The photograph of Maya came last. He stared at it for a moment before slipping it carefully into his lunch bag. Around him, the maintenance department continued moving, but differently now. Quieter, slower. People glanced his way and then looked down again. Nobody knew what to say. One technician finally approached. His name was Frank. He had worked beside Elijah for nearly 3 years. You are really leaving? Frank asked. Elijah zipped his bag. Looks that way. You could have explained. Elijah offered a small smile. Maybe. Frank shook his head. No, not maybe. You should have. Elijah did not answer. Some stories felt wrong when told for the purpose of saving yourself. Helping someone was one thing. Using it as leverage was another. He lifted the bag onto his shoulder and headed toward the elevator. The ride down felt strangely peaceful. Not because he was happy. Not because he was not worried. He was. Rent still existed. Bills still existed. Life did not pause because a company removed your name from a payroll system. Yet somewhere inside him there was calm. The kind that comes from knowing exactly why you made a choice. When the elevator doors opened into the lobby, sunlight spilled through the massive glass windows facing the street. Employees crossed the marble floor carrying laptops and coffee cups. Nobody noticed the man leaving. Most departures happen that way. Quietly, Elijah stepped outside and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Chicago moved around him in waves of noise and motion. A bus rolled past. A taxi honked somewhere down the block. Construction workers laughed near a food cart. The city kept going. It always did. His phone buzzed. Maya. He smiled before answering. Hey, Pumpkin. Hi, Daddy. Are you at work? Her cheerful voice carried through the speaker. Elijah looked back at the building one last time. Not exactly. Did you fix the elevator that makes funny noises? He chuckled softly. Not today. Maya thought for a second. Can we still get pizza on Friday? Children had a gift for asking the question hiding beneath every other question. Are we okay? Are things still normal? Elijah started walking toward the train station. We will figure something out. That means yes? She asked hopefully. That means yes. Maya laughed. The sound warmed something inside him. After they hung up, Elijah slipped the phone into his pocket and continued down the sidewalk. Above him, clouds drifted slowly between the towers. Back on the 48th floor, Charlotte Whitmore sat through another meeting. Numbers filled screens. Executives discussed projections. Investors demanded answers. Yet, Twice she found herself glancing toward the empty chair near the conference room wall. The chair where the maintenance technician had stood earlier. The man who never argued, never complained, never even explained why he was late. She pushed the thought aside and returned to the meeting. Some moments seem finished when they happen. Most people do not realize they are only the beginning. That evening, Charlotte Whitmore finally left the office after nearly 12 straight hours of meetings. The city lights shimmered beyond the tinted windows of her car as traffic crawled through downtown Chicago. Her phone rested silent for the first time all day. No investors, no board members, no emergencies demanding immediate attention. Just quiet. The kind of quiet she rarely trusted. When she arrived at her mother's brownstone on the north side, the porch light was already glowing. Warm. Familiar. One of the few places in her life untouched by corporate schedules and quarterly reports. Charlotte stepped inside and immediately noticed something different. Her mother was smiling. Not politely, not out of habit, genuinely smiling. Evelyn Whitmore sat wrapped in a soft blanket near the living room window, a steaming mug resting between her hands. "There she is," Evelyn said. "My busy daughter." Charlotte leaned down and kissed her cheek. "How are you feeling?" Evelyn laughed softly. "Much better than I was this morning." Charlotte paused. "This morning?" Evelyn nodded. "I had quite an adventure." Charlotte loosened her coat and settled into the chair across from her. "That does not sound reassuring." "It was not reassuring at the time," Evelyn admitted. "I lost my phone. Got confused. Ended up at a train station with no idea how to get home." Charlotte sat upright immediately. "What? I am fine now." "Mom." "I know." Evelyn waved gently. "I know." It was frightening. For a moment, neither spoke. The grandfather clock near the hallway ticked steadily. Charlotte felt a knot tighten in her chest. Her mother had always been independent. Seeing uncertainty touch her felt wrong somehow. Fragile. Temporary. Human. "What happened?" Charlotte finally asked. Evelyn stared into her coffee. Her expression softened. "A stranger helped me." Charlotte relaxed slightly. "Good. Not just helped." Evelyn shook her head. "He stayed." The words lingered in the room. "Most people walked right past me." Charlotte looked down. She had seen that happen before. Cities taught people to keep moving. But this man sat with me nearly an hour. Evelyn smiled to herself. Bought me coffee. Called for assistance. Never acted annoyed. Never looked at his watch. Charlotte listened quietly. "Do you know his name?" Evelyn shook her head. "No. But I remember him." "What do you remember?" Evelyn laughed softly. "Everything, actually." She pointed toward the kitchen. "He carried one of those black lunch bags workers bring to job sites." Charlotte listened. He had a worn blue work jacket. Another detail. A backpack covered with little cartoon keychains. Probably belonged to a child. Charlotte felt something stir faintly in her memory. Evelyn continued. "And there was a photograph sticking out of his bag. A little girl smiling." Charlotte said nothing. "The nicest eyes." Evelyn whispered. "Tired. Kind. Like someone who had every reason to leave and chose not to." Outside, a siren echoed faintly somewhere across the city. Charlotte stared at her mother, then at the untouched coffee on the table beside her. Somewhere deep in her mind, pieces had already begun moving toward each other. She just did not know it yet. Charlotte drove home later than usual. The city lights blurred beyond her windshield, but her thoughts remained fixed on the details her mother had shared. A worn blue work jacket. A child's backpack. A lunch bag. A little girl smiling from a photograph. None of those things should have mattered. Yet they did. By the time she stepped into her penthouse, the image had already followed her there. She placed her keys on the counter and stood in silence. Then she walked to her laptop. The screen illuminated the dark room. Hundreds of employee records sat behind a few passwords and security protocols. Charlotte told herself she was simply curious. Nothing more. She opened the personnel database. Maintenance division. Employee files. Her fingers paused above the keyboard. Then she typed a name. Elijah Turner. His profile appeared instantly. A photograph stared back at her. Work jacket. Calm eyes. The same calm eyes her mother had described. Charlotte felt something shift inside her chest. She leaned closer to the screen. Attached to his employee badge photo was an emergency contact form. Below his name sat a dependent listed as Maya Turner, age 8. Charlotte stared at the screen without blinking. The little girl from the photograph. The backpack. The lunch bag. Every detail aligned with uncomfortable precision. No. There had to be another explanation. She opened the security logs from that morning. The entry timestamp appeared on screen. Elijah had entered the building at 8:27 a.m., 27 minutes late. The same 27 minutes that had ended his employment. Charlotte pulled up the exterior camera footage. The grainy recording showed Elijah arriving from the train station, carrying his tool bag and lunch bag. She paused the video, zoomed in. There it was. A colorful backpack keychain hanging from the side of the bag. Exactly as her mother described. Her stomach tightened. Still, she kept looking. Minutes later, she accessed the Transportation Authority's public incident reports. A routine welfare assistance call from a downtown station. Elderly female assisted after becoming disoriented. Witness remained on scene until help arrived. Charlotte opened the attached summary. The witness description was brief. Male. African American. Blue work jacket. Construction or maintenance attire. She closed her eyes. The room suddenly felt too quiet. The glow of the computer screen seemed brighter now. Colder. Earlier that day, she had seen only a late employee. A violation. A delay. A problem to solve. Now a different picture emerged. While she sat in executive meetings and answered investor calls, Elijah had spent nearly an hour helping a frightened stranger get home safely. He had asked for nothing, claimed nothing, defended himself with nothing. The memory returned with painful clarity. That is all, she had asked. Yes, ma'am, he had answered. No excuses, no speech, no attempt to save himself. Charlotte looked back at his employee file. For the first time, she noticed something she had never paid attention to before. 3 years of service. Perfect performance reviews. 0 disciplinary actions. Consistently praised by supervisors. The kind of employee companies claimed they wanted. The kind she had dismissed in less than 30 seconds. Outside, the city continued shining beneath the night sky. Inside, Charlotte Whitmore sat motionless before the screen. Somewhere across Chicago, a man she had fired was probably helping his daughter with homework. And for the first time all day, Charlotte could not stop thinking about him. The next morning arrived with the sky washed pale gray by low clouds drifting over Chicago. Charlotte reached the office earlier than usual. Earlier than her assistants. Earlier than the executives. Earlier than the endless stream of meetings waiting on her calendar. For once, she was not thinking about quarterly earnings or investor expectations. She was thinking about a maintenance technician. The thought felt strange, almost unreasonable, yet it followed her. All the way to the 48th floor. The building was quiet. The hallways still carried that early morning stillness before thousands of footsteps filled them. Charlotte stepped out of the elevator and walked toward the maintenance department. No phone in her hand. No assistant beside her. Just silence. The room looked smaller than she remembered. Metal lockers lined one wall. Tool cabinets occupied another. Coffee stains marked a break table in the corner. Signs of ordinary lives. Lives she rarely stopped to notice. She moved slowly until she found the locker assigned to Elijah Turner. The door stood slightly open. Empty. The sight should not have affected her. Employees came and went every year. Names disappeared from payroll reports every month. Yet something about the empty space felt heavier than it should. Charlotte opened the locker fully. Nothing remained except a small sheet of paper taped to the inside wall. She stared at it. A child's drawing. Crayon colors. Uneven lines. The simple artwork showed a tall man standing beside a smiling little girl beneath a bright yellow sun. Across the top, written in careful elementary school handwriting, were the words, "My daddy fixes everything." Charlotte felt her breath catch. Not because of the drawing itself. Because of its sincerity. Because someone had created it believing every word. She reached out carefully and touched the edge of the paper. A strange feeling settled over her. Not guilt exactly. Something quieter. More uncomfortable. Perspective. For years, she had measured people by performance reviews, attendance reports, productivity metrics, and deadlines. Here was a reminder that every employee carried a life beyond those numbers. A daughter waiting after school. Bills. Responsibilities. Hopes. Worries. Entire worlds hidden behind identification badges. Charlotte lowered her hand. The room suddenly seemed filled with evidence she had ignored for years. Family photographs pinned inside lockers. Birthday cards. Lunch containers. A pair of children's gloves resting on a shelf. Small reminders that the people keeping her company running were not resources. They were human beings. Behind her, a voice spoke. Softly. He talked about her all the time. Charlotte turned. Frank stood near the doorway holding a toolbox. Maya, she asked. Frank nodded. Every day. He smiled faintly. He never started a conversation without mentioning that little girl at least once. Charlotte glanced back at the drawing. Was he always like that? Frank looked surprised by the question. Like what? Quiet. Frank laughed softly. Not quiet. Just humble. The answer lingered. Humble. Charlotte looked once more at the drawing inside the empty locker, then at the vacant space where years of work had ended in less than a minute. For the first time since becoming chief executive officer, she found herself wondering whether leadership had made her efficient at the cost of becoming observant. And standing there in the silence of an empty maintenance room, she realized she did not like the answer. Charlotte spent most of the afternoon staring at a business card she had not picked up in years. Human resources. Employee records. Address verification requests. The process took less than 5 minutes. The decision took much longer. By 6 o'clock, she was standing beside her car with a folded piece of paper in her hand. Elijah Turner's address. She almost turned around twice. It would have been easier to send an email. Easier to ask human resources to make a phone call. Easier to delegate the entire situation to someone else. That was what executives did. They delegated. But something about this felt personal. Not because of Elijah. Because of who she had been when she dismissed him. The drive carried her far from the polished towers of downtown. The streets grew quieter. Smaller. More familiar somehow. Children rode bicycles along cracked sidewalks. Porch lights flickered on as evening settled across the neighborhood. When Charlotte finally parked, she sat inside the car for a moment. The apartment building in front of her was modest, but well-maintained. Flower pots lined several windows. Wind chimes moved softly in the breeze. Nothing about it looked extraordinary. Yet she suddenly felt nervous. A feeling she had not experienced before a business meeting in years. She climbed the stairs and stopped outside apartment 3B. Then she knocked. For several seconds, nothing happened. Footsteps followed. Light footsteps. A child opened the door. Charlotte immediately recognized the smile from the drawing inside the locker. Maya. The little girl blinked up at her curiously. Can I help you? Charlotte smiled awkwardly. Is your father home? Before Maya could answer, Elijah appeared behind her. The moment he saw Charlotte, surprise crossed his face. Not anger. Not resentment. Just surprise. Miss Whitmore. Charlotte suddenly forgot every carefully prepared sentence she had rehearsed during the drive. Good evening, she managed. Elijah opened the door wider. Please come in. The apartment was small. Warm. Lived in. School papers covered part of the refrigerator. A science project occupied the dining table. Family photographs filled the shelves. Nothing expensive. Everything meaningful. Charlotte noticed a backpack near the couch. The same colorful keychains her mother had described. The same backpack she had seen hanging from his lunch bag in the security footage. Reality felt heavier when viewed up close. Maya excused herself to finish homework in her room, leaving the adults alone. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was uncomfortable only for Charlotte. Elijah seemed perfectly at ease. Finally, she looked around the apartment and said quietly, You have a beautiful home. Elijah smiled. It is enough. The answer struck her harder than expected. Not because of the words. Because he meant them. Charlotte spent her days surrounded by people chasing more. Bigger offices. Higher positions. Larger bonuses. Yet here sat a man who had lost his job and still carried himself with calm dignity. She looked down at her hands. I came because I owe you an apology. Elijah listened without interrupting. Outside, evening light faded beyond the window. Inside the small apartment, the distance between a chief executive officer and a former maintenance technician suddenly felt much smaller than it had inside a corporate tower. Elijah remained quiet for several seconds after Charlotte spoke. The apartment felt still. Somewhere down the hallway, Maya's pencil scratched softly against paper as she worked on homework. A clock ticked above the kitchen doorway. Small sounds. Ordinary sounds. The kind Charlotte rarely noticed anymore. You do not owe me anything, Elijah finally said. Charlotte looked up immediately. I do. He shook his head gently. You made a decision based on the information you had. No. The word escaped faster than she intended. I made a decision based on assumptions. Elijah studied her face, but did not interrupt. I never asked why you were late, she continued quietly. I never listened. For a moment neither spoke. Charlotte found herself staring at the family photographs lining the shelves. Birthdays. School events. Summer afternoons in parks. Simple moments captured in inexpensive frames. She wondered how many important moments she had missed in her own life while chasing the next meeting, the next goal, the next crisis. My mother told me everything, she said. About the train station. About what you did for her. Elijah leaned back slightly. Your mother was scared. And you stayed. He shrugged. Anyone should have. Charlotte almost smiled. That is the thing. Elijah waited. Most people did not. The words settled gently between them. Outside, a breeze moved through the trees beyond the apartment window. Elijah looked toward the hallway where Maya's room sat. When he spoke again, his voice was calm. My daughter watches everything I do. Charlotte followed his gaze. What do you mean? Children learn from what we do when nobody is paying attention. A faint smile appeared on his face. If Maya ever ends up lost somewhere, I hope somebody stops. Charlotte lowered her eyes. The simplicity of the answer somehow made it more powerful. No speech. No grand lesson. Just a father hoping the world would show his daughter the same kindness he offered a stranger. I am sorry, Charlotte said again. This time the words sounded different. Smaller. More honest. Elijah nodded once. I know. The response surprised her. You do? You would not be here otherwise. For the first time that evening, Charlotte laughed softly. Not because anything was funny. Because the truth of it left no room for pretending. She looked around the apartment once more. Everything felt real here. Nothing curated. Nothing polished for appearances. Just people trying their best. Frank told me something this morning, she said. Elijah raised an eyebrow. That is dangerous. Charlotte smiled. He said you were humble. Elijah groaned quietly. Frank talks too much. The laughter that followed was brief, but genuine. Then silence returned. Comfortable this time. Charlotte realized something unexpected. She had spent years surrounded by powerful people, influential people, brilliant people. Yet very few had made her think as deeply as the man sitting across from her now. Not because he spoke more, because he needed to speak less. And somewhere between the apology, the photographs, and the quiet honesty of a small apartment, Charlotte began to understand that character was often easiest to recognize in people who never tried to prove they had it. 3 weeks later, the executive conference room at Whitmore Capital felt different. The glass walls were the same. The polished table was the same. The city skyline still stretched beyond the windows. Yet something had changed. Charlotte sat at the head of the table reviewing a proposal that had surprised nearly every member of her leadership team. It was not about profits. It was not about expansion. It was about people. New employee support programs. Flexible emergency leave policies. Better communication between management and staff. Several executives questioned the changes. A few openly resisted them. Charlotte listened patiently. Then she asked a simple question. How many of you know the names of the people who clean your offices every night? The room became quiet. Nobody answered. Charlotte nodded. That silence told her everything. Later that afternoon, she stood in the lobby watching employees move through the building. Secretaries, security guards, maintenance workers, accountants, receptionists. For the first time in years, she noticed faces instead of departments. Stories instead of positions. Lives instead of job titles. Her phone buzzed. A message from Human Resources. The candidate has arrived. Charlotte smiled faintly. A few minutes later, the elevator doors opened. Elijah stepped into the lobby wearing the same calm expression he always seemed to carry. He was not returning because he needed saving. And Charlotte knew it. The meeting she had requested was not about correcting a public relations mistake or easing her conscience. It was about respect, the kind that should have been there from the beginning. Elijah approached. Good afternoon, Miss Whitmore. Charlotte shook her head lightly. Charlotte is fine. He smiled. I'm not sure I can do that. She laughed. Fair enough. Together they walked toward a conference room overlooking the city. The conversation lasted less than an hour. When it ended, Elijah accepted a newly created position coordinating facility operations and employee support services. A role built around the thing he already did naturally, looking after people. As he prepared to leave, Charlotte stopped him near the door. Can I ask you something? Elijah nodded. Why did you come back? He thought for a moment before answering. Because everybody deserves the chance to do better after a mistake. Charlotte lowered her eyes briefly. The words landed gently, yet they carried more weight than any speech she had heard in a boardroom. That evening, as the building slowly emptied, Charlotte stood alone beside the window in her office. Below, Chicago shimmered beneath thousands of lights. Somewhere across the city, Maya was probably finishing homework. Evelyn was likely enjoying a cup of tea. Elijah was heading home after another ordinary day. Charlotte smiled to herself. Strange how the most important lessons rarely arrived through billion-dollar deals or corporate victories. Sometimes they arrive through a missed train, a frightened stranger, a little girl's drawing, and a man who chose kindness when nobody was watching. She once thought leadership meant having all the answers. Now she understood something different. Leadership began with seeing people, truly seeing them. And on the morning she believed she had removed a problem from her company, she had actually dismissed one of the best examples of character she had ever encountered. He never raised his voice. He never defended himself. He never asked for recognition. Yet through nothing more than quiet kindness, he changed far more than his own future. He changed hers.